The death penalty is a hotly contested issue. Today we're going to talk about the death penalty and how it relates to the family. Capital punishment has been in use for over 2,000 years in Western civilization. In the 1930s in the United States, capital punishment was at its height, with an average of 167 executions per year. In 1994, President Clinton expanded the federal death penalty by signing the Violent Crime Control and Law Enforcement Act. In January of 1999, Pope John Paul II visited St. Louis, Missouri, and urged an end to capital punishment. And in December of 2007, New Jersey became the first state to legislatively abolish capital punishment. Currently, there are 27 states that have the death penalty, as well as the U.S. military, and there are 23 states that don't have the death penalty. But federal capital punishment is rarely used, but it does apply in every U.S. state and territory. In Catholic teaching, there was an allowance for the death penalty only to defend society, or as a form of self-defense. But in 2267 of the Catechism of the Catholic Church on the death penalty in 2018, Pope Francis ended up adding to it saying, more effective systems of detention have been developed. These systems give protection to citizens, but don't definitively deprive the guilty of the possibility of redemption. This is important because this has changed the Catholic Church's stance from that perspective, because now there are more effective forms of protection to citizens, and the death penalty isn't really needed more as a form of self-defense. One thing that he mentions there was that it can definitively deprive the guilty of redemption. Redemption is a key point in Catholic or Christian teaching. In Catholic teaching, it is very important that the Catholic Church is a means that the Lord uses to bring salvation to the world. In the center of Christianity, it's all about redemption and Christ's redemption of us. And if we think about ending someone's life takes away the opportunity for them to come to salvation or for their life to be redeemed. They might still have to face earthly punishment, but at least they may be able to have some eternal redemption. Now, another thing that Catholic teaching talks about is this protection of life and value of life. Cardinal Bernardin says that we must have a consistent life ethic. And by supporting the death penalty, it's essentially supporting this culture of death. Now, what does he mean when it talks about a consistent life ethic? It means consistently having an ethic of choosing life, whether it be with the issues of abortion or even death penalty, and many other areas in life. It is consistently choosing life from conception to natural death. In fact, another point to Catholic teaching is dignity of the human person. We're all made in the image of God, and the death penalty attacks that human dignity. Shane Claiborne in his book says, death closes the door to any possibility of redemption. Grace opens up that door. Brian Stevenson in his book Just Mercy says, each of us is more than the worst thing that we've ever done. And that includes a person on death row. Now, if we look to scriptures, even in John 8, Jesus stops a legal execution. He had every right to stone this woman because he was without sin, and that would have been legal. But instead, he offered mercy and redemption and did not cast a stone. Jesus himself suffered a wrongful execution. He was perfect and did no wrong, yet he himself suffered the death penalty. In addition, we are called to visit those in prison. Now, that presumes that we keep people in prison alive if we're called to visit them. I mean, we even go back to Catholic teaching or even Christianity. And if we truly believe that God is a God who can forgive and redeem us, then we have to believe the gospel is for everyone, even those that we might not think deserve it, because it's not about what we deserve. It's a gift that's been given to us. Also, we have new things like DNA evidence. Many people have been sentenced to death who have been later exonerated based on that. And there have been a total of 186 death row exonerations, and many more to come. The National Research Council has shared a report called Deterrence in the Death Penalty and states, according to the country's top academic criminological societies, 88% of these experts rejected the notion that the death penalty acts as a deterrent to murder. Capital punishment is also cost-intensive. California released a study showing that the cost of the death penalty in California since 1978 has been over $4 billion. And in Texas alone, each death penalty case costs about $2.3 million, which is 3 times the amount it would cost to keep someone in a single-cell prison in maximum security for 40 years. So there is such an economic injustice to killing people. And these funds would better allow for the flourishing of society and more specifically, families. Some of those funds could be allocated to compensate victims' families. They could help with better care and treatment, help with counseling services to those affected by it, or even restorative justice work. We're going to talk now about families of those who are on death row or have been executed. Those death row families, they deal with family separation, the fear of being judged by other people, and typically, if the father is the one who's been incarcerated, fatherlessness in the home, which has such a great effect on the family, especially children. Also, the looming death of a loved one of the judicial process is so slow and long that could even prolong their death on death row by decades. And that perpetuates this grief and pain. Also, through media exposure, they might repeatedly relive traumatic events. The Texas After Violence Project report talks about how members of the family often face similar challenges as family members of murder victims. They may suffer from depression, anxiety, PTSD, or other mental issues. And they might have difficulties to seek mental health care because there's often a stigma of being associated with a death row prisoner. And there's often a lack of understanding of their experiences. Michael Radelet says, in contrast to other people facing loss, these families must know that the death of their loved one is actively desired by others. Now I'm going to talk for a bit about the families of murder victims or of people who have families of people who have experienced violence crime. Psychologist Dr. Robert Mueller says, the death penalty produces negative effects on the family and friends of murder victims, and these are called co-victims. The University of Minnesota reported that only 2.5% of co-victims reported achieving closure as a result of capital punishment, which means that over 97% did not receive closure through capital punishment. 20.1% said that capital punishment didn't help them heal. A family member said, healing is a process, not an event. Marquette University Law School said that co-victims had improved physical and psychological health and greater satisfaction in the legal system in cases where the perpetrator received a life sentence rather than a death sentence. Equal Justice USA talks about that when the defendant and victim are related, families are even further torn apart. For example, children must cope with the murder of one parent and then suffer a new layer of trauma and grief when the other parent is executed for that crime. For example, Felicia Floyd was 11 when her father murdered her mother. Her father was on death row in Georgia for 21 years, and during that time, the family was able to find some reconciliation. Felicia and her brother pleaded with the state not to execute her dad, but they were ignored. And the execution ended up leaving them as orphans. Mr. Pelkey, another family member to a victim, said, God touched my heart. He realized that he didn't have to see someone else die in order to bring healing from his Nana's death. Mr. Pelkey said, why do we kill people to show that killing people is wrong? So through the study of capital punishment, Catholic teachings, personal stories, It is shown that there is such a great effect on families of murder victims or families of those who are on death row or even executed. Therefore, the death penalty punishes rather than heals families.